A knight kneels in a stone chapel. Candlelight flickers across his face as he signs a document. Not a will, not a confession, a mortgage. He's pledging his entire estate, his family's legacy, to the church. In return, he receives nothing tangible. No gold, no soldiers, just a promise that when he marches to Jerusalem and dies in the desert, his soul will be saved and his family protected. This isn't charity, this is business. What you're witnessing is the birth of international banking. Not in Renaissance Florence, not in Amsterdam's golden age, but here, in the shadowed halls of medieval monasteries, where monks in robes were quietly building the world's first continental financial network. This is the story of how the Catholic Church became Europe's most powerful bank, how it financed holy war through financial innovation, and how warrior monks called the Knights Templar would transform these systems into something the world had never seen. A banking empire that would make kings tremble and popes jealous. This is the untold story of medieval finance, and it begins with one man's vision in 1095. November 27th, 1095. Clermont, France. Pope Urban II stands before a crowd of thousands. His speech will change the world. Deus vult, God wills it. Jerusalem must be liberated from Muslim control. Warriors of Christ, take up the cross and march to the Holy Land. The crowd erupts. Knights pledge themselves immediately. But Urban II knows something they don't. Enthusiasm doesn't pay for armor. Faith doesn't feed armies, and passion certainly doesn't fund a military campaign spanning 3,000 miles. Urban faces an impossible equation. To retake Jerusalem, he needs tens of thousands of soldiers. Each knight requires horses, weapons, armor, supplies, and servants. A single knight's crusade could cost the equivalent of several years' income. Multiply that by thousands and you're looking at the most expensive military operation Europe had ever attempted. And here's the problem. There was no treasury, no central bank, no tax system that could fund this. The church had spiritual authority, but limited liquid wealth. The nobility had land, but land doesn't march to Jerusalem. Urban needed to convert Europe's feudal wealth, locked in estates and fields, into mobile military power. He needed a financial revolution, and he was about to create one. Urban's solution was brilliant and ruthless. Create a new form of credit backed not by gold, but by salvation itself. The mechanism was simple but profound. Take the cross, pledge your estate to the church, and receive spiritual credit, protection for your family, and logistical support. Die in the Holy Land. Your family keeps the estate under church protection, and your soul bypasses purgatory entirely. But this wasn't just spiritual accounting. This was the world's first large-scale asset-backed securities system. Here's how it worked in practice. A knight owns an estate worth, say, 500 acres with tenant farmers. He cannot sell it quickly. He cannot divide it easily. But he can pledge it. The church accepts the pledge, records it in duplicate, sometimes triplicate. One copy stays with the local monastery, one goes to the regional bishop, one might travel to Rome itself. The knight receives immediate benefits: exemption from debts during his crusade, protection of his property from seizure, church intervention if his neighbors try to steal his land while he's gone, and most importantly, a network of monasteries along the crusade route that will provide shelter, food, and financial services. The church gains immediate legal claim to the property if the knight dies, rental income from the estate while he's gone, increased landholdings across Europe, and leverage over noble families for generations. This wasn't charity. This was collateralized lending at continental scale. Within months of Urban's call, thousands of pledges were flowing into monasteries across France, Germany, Italy, and England. But a pledge is only valuable if it can be enforced. And enforcement required something revolutionary: a transnational information network. The church already had the infrastructure. Monasteries were connected through established routes. Monks traveled regularly between houses. Written Latin was standardized across Europe. The church had created, almost accidentally, the continent's only reliable communication system. Now they weaponized it for finance. Pledges were signed, sealed, and recorded in multiple locations. Monks traveled as envoys, ensuring records were cross-checked and updated. Every estate pledged became not just a property transfer but a node in a network of trust that spanned the continent. The scale is staggering. Tens of thousands of knights, dozens of major monasteries, hundreds of estates, countless villages, all linked in a web of obligations and protections. No centralized bank existed, yet the church had effectively created the first continental financial clearinghouse. It relied not on technology but on human systems, hierarchy, secrecy, oaths, and ritual enforcement. Every death, every pledge, every mortgage, each one reinforced this network, making it resilient, reliable, and increasingly feared by secular authorities. Consider what was actually happening beneath the surface of holy war. Large swaths of land were moving from the nobility into ecclesiastical control. Power was shifting, silently but irrevocably. Political authority, long tied to land ownership, began to intertwine with spiritual legitimacy. A noble family that had ruled a region for generations suddenly found their estate held in trust by the local monastery. The monks didn't govern directly, but they controlled the legal claim. They collected revenues. They decided disputes. And most critically, they could transfer that claim across hundreds of miles through their network. Nobles found themselves dependent not just on traditional alliances and marriages, but on institutions that could enforce contracts from Rome to Jerusalem. You are watching the foundations of Europe's first truly transnational financial power being laid, generations before any banking family in Florence would dream of creating letters of credit. But how did this system actually function day to day? Imagine you're a French knight in 1098. You've pledged your estate and joined the First Crusade. You're now in Antioch, 1,000 miles from home. You're wounded. You need money for medical care and supplies. You approach the local monastery. You present a sealed letter from your home monastery in France, verified with wax seals and written in standardized Latin. The monk reads it, cross-references it with regional records that have been sent ahead by messenger, and advances you silver. This silver doesn't come from France. It comes from the local monastery's treasury, which holds wealth collected from that region. Your debt is recorded. The record travels back to France through the monastic network. Your estate's revenues are adjusted to repay the loan. This is credit transfer. This is debt clearing. This is international banking. In 1098, the system worked because of three revolutionary elements. First, standardization. Every pledge followed similar formats. Every monastery kept similar records. Latin unified the documentation. Seals verified authenticity. Second, distributed verification. Records existed in multiple locations. Fraud was difficult because destroying one record meant nothing if copies existed hundreds of miles away. Third, enforcement through spiritual authority. Break an oath to the church. You risked excommunication. In medieval Europe, this was a death sentence for your social and economic life. Spiritual power became economic power. The church's financial network created ripples that changed European society in ways Urban II never imagined. Smaller nobles who couldn't afford to crusade found themselves economically disadvantaged. Their neighbors were gaining spiritual prestige and church backing. This created pressure to join subsequent crusades, not for religious fervor but for financial survival. Monasteries evolved. Scriptoriums that once copied religious texts now maintained financial ledgers. Monks trained in theology now studied contract law. Prayer schedules made room for accounting. Information itself became valuable. Monasteries began collecting intelligence beyond financial matters. Which roads were safe? Which ports had ships? Which cities had plague? This data, gathered for crusade logistics, became valuable for trade. Merchants began paying monasteries for information. The church had stumbled into becoming Europe's first intelligence network, and intelligence, as always, was profitable. Not everyone celebrated this transformation. Some church reformers were horrified. Monks were supposed to pray, not calculate interest rates. Monasteries were meant to be refuges from worldly concerns, not financial hubs. Bernard of Clairvaux, one of medieval Europe's most influential religious figures, would later denounce the mixing of spiritual and financial power. Secular rulers watched with growing unease. The church was accumulating land and wealth at an unprecedented rate. Kings who once commanded absolute authority in their domains now had to negotiate with ecclesiastical powers that could mobilize resources across borders. But the criticisms didn't matter. The system was too useful, too profitable, too successful, and it was about to evolve into something even more powerful. Jerusalem, the First Crusade, has succeeded, but barely. Christian kingdoms cling to a narrow strip of coastline. Pilgrims flood into the Holy Land, traveling roads infested with bandits. Many are robbed, many are killed. 9 French knights approach King Baldwin II of Jerusalem with a proposal: create a religious military order dedicated to protecting pilgrims, not just soldiers, not just monks, both simultaneously. The Knights Templar are born. In the beginning, they're desperately poor. 9 knights cannot protect thousands of pilgrims. They live in the captured Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount, hence their name. They rely on donations and their own dwindling resources. But something changes in 1129. Bernard of Clairvaux, despite his later criticisms of church wealth, champions their cause. Pope Honorius II officially recognizes the order. European nobles begin flooding them with donations, land, money, castles, estates across France, England, Spain, Portugal, Italy. Within a decade, the Templars transform from 9 poor knights into a continent-spanning organization, and they inherit something crucial: access to the church's financial network. The Templars didn't invent medieval banking, they industrialized it. They took the church's pledge and mortgage system and asked, what if we made this faster, more efficient, more secure? What if we created financial instruments that could move wealth instantly across thousands of miles? The Templars had unique advantages. They were warriors, so they could protect wealth physically. They were monks, so people trusted them with oaths and spiritual authority. They had chapters across Europe and the Holy Land, creating a ready-made branch network. And crucially, they answered to the Pope alone, exempt from local laws and taxes. They began offering new services: deposit banking. Leave your gold in Paris, receive a coded letter, withdraw equivalent value in Jerusalem. No need to transport wealth through bandit-infested routes, letters of credit. A merchant could deposit funds in London, receive documentation, and draw on those funds in Acre. All while the Templars handled the actual transfer of physical wealth through their secure convoys. Loans to kings, entire kingdoms began borrowing from the Templars. The order financed wars, ransoms, even government operations. They became too big to fail, centuries before that phrase existed. But the real innovation was in the instruments themselves. The Templars perfected the encrypted letter of credit. You would deposit gold in a Templar house and receive a document covered in symbols, codes, and seals. This document could be divided into parts. You might tear it in half, keeping one piece and sending the other ahead with a trusted servant. At the destination Templar house, you'd present your half. They'd match it with the other half. The unique tier pattern was impossible to forge. Only when both pieces aligned would they release the funds. This was cryptographic security in the 12th century. They created something resembling checking accounts. Nobles maintained balances across multiple Templar houses. They could write coded instructions to transfer funds between accounts. The Templars would settle these transfers internally through their network, moving paper instead of gold. They even invented early derivatives. A merchant might contract with the Templars to guarantee a price for goods delivered months in the future. The Templars would absorb the risk in exchange for fees. If prices changed, the merchant was protected. The Templars, with their vast information network, could predict markets better than individual traders. Every innovation built on the foundation the Church had created during the First Crusade: standardized documentation, distributed verification, spiritual enforcement, and a continent-spanning network. By the early 1200s, the Templars operated the most sophisticated financial system in the Western world. They owned estates across Europe, generating steady income. They operated farms, vineyards, and manufacturing centers. They built their own ships and managed trade routes. They maintained fortress-like chapter houses that served as banks, warehouses, and military bases simultaneously. Kings kept their treasuries in Templar houses. The Paris Temple became effectively the treasury of France. The London Temple did the same for England. When monarchs needed loans, they went to the Templars. When they needed to move money secretly, the Templars provided that service too. The order's wealth became legendary. Rumors spread about secret treasures. Some were true, most were exaggerated, but perception mattered. The Templars were seen as impossibly rich, impossibly powerful, and increasingly impossibly dangerous to secular authority. Step back and see what had been created. A military order that was also a bank. A religious institution that was also a multinational corporation. An organization that answered to no king but could make or break kingdoms financially. The Templars had taken the Church's crusade financing model and evolved it into something unprecedented. They'd created fractional reserve banking, keeping only a portion of deposits as physical reserves while lending out the rest. International currency exchange, converting between the dozens of different coins used across Europe and the East. Escrow services, holding funds or property until conditions were met. Secure communications, using codes and ciphers to transmit financial information. Auditing systems, with regular inspections and standardized accounting across all chapters. And perhaps most remarkably, they'd created trust. In a world where betrayal was common and contracts were enforced by violence, the Templars built a reputation for absolute reliability. Your gold was safer with warrior monks than in your own castle. This trust was the real currency. It's what allowed their letters of credit to function. It's what made kings willing to borrow from them. It's what turned parchment and wax seals into instruments as valuable as gold itself. But trust cuts both ways, and power breeds envy. By the late 1200s, the Crusades were failing. The last Christian strongholds in the Holy Land fell in 1291. The Templars, founded to protect pilgrims to Jerusalem, had lost their original purpose, but they still had their wealth, and their network, and their power. King Philip IV of France watched this with calculation. He was drowning in debt, much of it owed to the Templars themselves. His kingdom was financially strained from wars and mismanagement, and here was an organization, headquartered in his capital, holding more wealth than his entire treasury. Philip began planning not just a raid, not just a seizure, but the complete destruction of the order. He needed to discredit them so thoroughly that no one would question what he was about to do. October 13, 1307, dawn breaks over Paris. Simultaneously across France, royal soldiers storm Templar chapter houses. Hundreds of knights are arrested. The charges are spectacular: heresy, idol worship, denying Christ, obscene rituals. Most historians now believe these charges were fabricated, but that didn't matter. Under torture, some Templars confessed to anything. Those who didn't confess were tortured more. Some died, others broke. Philip had timed his move perfectly. Pope Clement V, based in Avignon and under French influence, could be pressured. The other European monarchs, also indebted to the Templars, saw opportunity. Within years, the order was dissolved. The last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake in 1314. Legend says he cursed Philip and Clement from the flames. Both men died within the year. Coincidence? Probably. But the story endured. What happened to the Templar wealth is one of history's enduring mysteries. Some was seized by Philip, though he discovered less than expected. The Templars had time to hide or move significant assets before the arrests. Some chapters outside France, warned by the network that was being destroyed, evacuated their treasuries. Templar ships sailed from La Rochelle and were never seen again. Did they go to Scotland? To Portugal, where the order was reformed under a new name? To secret islands? Treasure hunters have searched for centuries. Nothing definitive has been found. But the real treasure wasn't gold. It was the system. And that couldn't be destroyed. The financial innovations the Templars perfected didn't die with them. Italian banking families in Florence, Genoa, and Venice had been watching and learning. The Medici would later use techniques pioneered by the Templars. Letters of credit, branch banking, encrypted communications, double-entry bookkeeping that the Templars helped develop. The concept of international finance, of moving wealth through documentation rather than physical transport, of creating trust through institutional reliability. These survived. Portuguese and Spanish military orders absorbed former Templars and their knowledge. The Knights Hospitaller inherited some Templar properties and banking relationships. Even the methods used to destroy the Templars taught lessons. Future bankers learned to cultivate royal favor, to never appear too powerful, to hide wealth more carefully, and to diversify operations across multiple jurisdictions so no single ruler could destroy them. Look at any modern bank, and you'll see ghosts of the Templar system. Branch networks allowing deposits in one location and withdrawals in another. Templars did it first. Encrypted documents for secure transactions. Templars pioneered it. Letters of credit and transferable notes. Templar innovations. Institutions that operate across multiple countries with standardized procedures. The Templars wrote that playbook. Even the physical design of banks, fortress-like buildings projecting security and permanence, echoes the Templar chapter houses. The Church's crusade financing system, refined by the Templars into true international banking, created Templars that survived because they worked. They solved real problems, moving wealth safely, creating trust at distance, standardizing transactions across jurisdictions. These weren't just medieval solutions to medieval problems. They were fundamental innovations in how humans organize financial activity. Trace the lineage forward. From church pledge systems to Templar letters of credit, from Templar branch banking to Italian merchant banking families, from Italian innovations to Dutch finance in the 1600s, from Amsterdam to London, from London to New York, every modern financial center, every international bank, every credit card transaction, every wire transfer, exists because medieval monks and warrior monks solved the problem of moving trust across distance. The technology has changed, the principles haven't. When you tap your card in one country and it debits your account in another, you're using a system that would be recognizable to a Templar knight in 1200. The tools are different. The underlying logic is identical. We remember the Crusades for battles and religious fervor, for Richard the Lionheart and Saladin, for sieges and suffering, but the real revolution wasn't military. It was financial. Pope Urban II, trying to fund an army, accidentally created Europe's first continent-spanning financial network. The Church, managing crusade pledges, pioneered techniques for moving wealth and trust across thousands of miles. The Templars, refining these systems, built medieval Europe's most sophisticated banking empire. They did this without computers, without instant communication, without any of the technology we associate with finance. They did it with parchment, wax seals, Latin oaths, and an understanding that wealth isn't gold. Wealth is trust, and trust can be systematized. The Templars fell because they became too powerful, too wealthy, too independent. But their innovations were too valuable to die. Other institutions, other people, picked up the pieces and carried them forward. Some mysteries may never be solved. Where did the Templar treasure go? How much wealth did they actually accumulate? What secrets died with Jacques de Molay? But the bigger question is philosophical. What happens when spiritual institutions become financial powers? The Church created a financial network to fund holy war. The Templars refined it into a banking empire. Both eventually faced backlash, not for their religious activities, but for their economic power. This tension, between spiritual authority and financial reality, between religious mission and institutional wealth, hasn't disappeared. It's transformed, but it remains one of history's recurring themes. Next time you use an ATM in a foreign country, or transfer money internationally, or trust a bank to hold your wealth, remember, you're using a system born in medieval monasteries, refined by warrior monks and built on technologies of trust that haven't fundamentally changed in 900 years. The Templars are gone. Their fortresses are ruined. Their wealth is scattered or lost. But their innovation remains, hidden in plain sight, running through the veins of every financial transaction in the modern world. The Church's medieval financial empire didn't just finance crusades, it created the architecture of international banking. And that architecture, tested by centuries, reinforced by countless innovations, still stands. Because some revolutions aren't fought with swords, they're fought with ledgers, and their victories endure long after the warriors are dust.